A lonely veteran sat in his old cabin on Christmas Eve, ready to end his life after losing the woman he loved. But just as he whispered his final goodbye, a little girl from across the street knocked on his door with a handmade card and a German shepherd who refused to leave his side. Minutes later, that same dog would sense danger, break through the storm, and save the veteran from the edge of death. What happened that night will make you cry and believe that Christmas miracles still exist. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Winter had settled over Maple Hollow the way a lullaby settles over a sleepy child. Soft, pale, and shimmering. The roofs were glazed with powdered snow, pine trees bowed under frost, and distant chimneys whispered slender lines of smoke into the cold December sky. On Willow Bend Road, a cedar cabin stood alone as though trying to remember what warmth once felt like. Inside lived Thomas Hale, a 62-year-old veteran who carried grief the way other men carried coats. Worn, familiar, impossible to set down. Thomas was tall but slightly hunched, the curve of his spine shaped by battles both physical and emotional. His hair, silvered prematurely by loss, framed a face etched with the quiet erosion of time. His right hand shook faintly, an old war injury that had never healed properly. He spoke little, not because he disliked people, but because silence felt safer than the weight of memories. The cabin's interior was a museum of what once was. A dusty medal from a mission he no longer dared to remember. A pair of worn military boots whose soles had known too many foreign soils, and, above all, Margaret's blue wool scarf, draped over a wooden chair like a ghost refusing to leave. Margaret had been his anchor. Her laughter once echoed through the cabin like wind chimes in summer. But last Christmas she slipped away after months of illness, leaving Thomas wandering through his own life like a man searching for a door in the dark. Tonight the ache felt sharper. Outside, the world shimmered with Christmas lights. Maple Hollow's families were decorating windows, baking pies, tuning radios to festive songs. The whole town looked as if joy itself had decided to move in. But inside the cedar cabin, Thomas prepared for absence. A folded letter sat on the table, ink still damp where he had paused repeatedly, unsure how to say goodbye to a world he no longer felt part of. Beside it lay a bottle of sleeping pills and a cup of tea long gone cold. He exhaled slowly. It fogged in the frigid air, even indoors. Winter had a way of sneaking into old, drafty cabins and into old, drafty hearts. Just as his trembling fingers reached for the bottle, a sharp, bright sound shattered the heavy quiet. A bark. Joyful. Loud, like a stone thrown into a still lake. He frowned and looked out the window. A little girl was hurrying across the snowy driveway toward his porch. She was small, perhaps 10, wrapped in a red winter coat so puffy it made her look like a wandering holiday ornament. Her name, he would learn moments later, was Lily Carter. Lily was the kind of child who seemed born from a mixture of curiosity and kindness. A cascade of light brown curls framed her round face and her cheeks glowed rosy from the cold. Her eyes, wide, amber, full of stories she hadn't yet had time to tell, sparkled with the innocent bravery of children who still believed everyone could be a friend. Beside her trotted a magnificent German shepherd, 5 years old, tall and sleek, with a coat of black saddle and warm, tan fur. His name was Bear, though his movements were more wolfishly graceful than his name suggested. Bear's ears stood sharply alert. His amber-brown eyes searched the world with a mix of intelligence and a soldier's caution, as if always waiting for a silent cue. Bear wasn't just a family pet. He had once belonged to Lily's uncle, a retired police K-9 handler, before joining the Carter family. The dog retained a subtle discipline, the poised stance, the steady breath, the uncanny ability to sense what human hearts tried to hide. Lily reached the porch, stopping just in front of Thomas's door. She took a deep breath, her mittened hands gripping a small tin decorated with green holly leaves. Then she knocked. Thomas hesitated, swallowing the shards of panic that always rose when anyone approached his home. But something in the girl's eagerness, so earnest it bordered on clumsy, softened him enough to open the door. "Hello, sir," Lily chirped, her voice bright like sleigh bells. "We just moved in across the street. Mom baked cookies and we wanted to give it to you." Her words were a rush of warm air in the cold. Bear approached more slowly. He stepped close to Thomas, lowered his head, and sniffed at the man's trembling hand. The dog's brows furrowed, a curious, almost human expression. Bear sensed things: sorrow clinging to a coat, fear hiding behind a heartbeat, grief hovering like a shadow. He looked up at Thomas with solemn intensity, as if silently saying, "I know, I see you." Thomas forced a smile, thin, brittle. "Well, thank you," he murmured, accepting the tin of cookies. But when Lily smiled up at him, so open, so unaware of how fragile he was, something inside Thomas cracked. Kindness, he realized, could hurt more than cruelty. Because cruelty hardened you, but kindness reminded you of everything you'd lost. "Your mom must be very kind," he added quietly. "She is," Lily beamed. "She says holidays are for sharing, and Dad says neighbors should always look out for each other." Behind her cheerful tone was a hint of nervousness, anxiety from being in a new town, new school, new life. But Lily pushed those fears down with the natural resilience of children who believed the world would bend toward goodness if they smiled hard enough. Thomas watched her for a moment. She reminded him of the children Margaret used to bring Christmas gifts to. The thought tightened his throat. Bear nudged Thomas's leg again. A soft pressure, not demanding, simply steady. A small lifeline offered without a word. Thomas stepped back. "Thank you for the cookies," he whispered. "You two should head home before it gets colder." Lily nodded. She waved, and Bear gave one last look, long, knowing, before following her across the snowy yard. Thomas closed the door gently, and the silence that followed was no longer empty. It felt unsettled, as if someone had rattled the foundations of the loneliness he'd so carefully built. Across the street, inside the warm Carter home, Lily told her parents about the quiet, Santa-looking neighbor. Her mother, Emily Carter, a gentle, soft-spoken woman in her late 30s, worried that Lily was too trusting. Her father, Daniel Carter, a tall, middle-aged history teacher with a thoughtful gaze, hoped Lily's boldness might help her adjust to their new life after leaving the city. None of them knew that tonight, a little girl and her dog had unknowingly nudged a dying man one step away from the edge. Morning draped itself over Maple Hollow in a dense, white hush, the kind of winter silence that seemed almost protective, as though the world wanted to spare its inhabitants from hearing their own sorrow too clearly. Frost coated the cabin windows in delicate branching patterns, each crystal a reminder that even cold things could be beautiful. Inside the cedar cabin, however, beauty had no place. The stillness felt heavy, expectant, like a held breath before an irrevocable step. Thomas Hale stood beside his small wooden table, his tall, thin frame outlined by the pale winter light seeping through the curtains. His silver hair looked more unkempt than usual. He hadn't slept. Shadows under his tired eyes deepened the harsh lines of age and grief carved into his face. His right hand trembled noticeably as he held the small bottle of pills he had left uncapped the night before. He whispered, barely audible, "Margaret, I'm almost there. Just wait a little longer." Then he lifted a pill toward his mouth. But the world, or something within it, chose that moment to intervene. A violent scratching exploded against the front door, rapid, desperate, and powerful enough that the thin wood panel shuddered. Thomas jerked, the pill slipping from his grip. The scratching grew louder, urgent, like claws channeling a storm. He froze for a heartbeat, then forced himself to move toward the door. When he opened it, a blur of black and tan fur barreled into him. Bear. The 5-year-old German shepherd crashed against his legs with such force that Thomas stumbled backward into the armchair, breath knocked from his chest. Bear's chest rose and fell in fast, frantic bursts. His ears were pinned back, his eyes wide with fear and intensity, the kind of expression animals wore only when confronting something invisible to human senses. He barked, a sharp, scolding sound followed by a wounded whine. His gaze locked onto the pill bottle still sitting on the table. Then he barked again, louder, insistent. Thomas swallowed hard. All right, boy." His voice cracked, fragile. He reached out a shaking hand and rested it on Bear's head. The dog leaned into the touch instantly, as though anchoring Thomas to the present moment. Bear's breathing slowed. His weight against Thomas's knees felt grounding, and though he couldn't speak, the message was unmistakable. Don't go. Not yet. Thomas closed his eyes, letting out a long, trembling exhale. He set the pill bottle firmly back on the shelf and turned away from it. He walked to the small kitchen counter and poured a bowl of water. His hands still shook, but now it was from something more complicated than despair. He knelt slowly and placed the bowl on the floor. "There you go, big fella." His voice carried the faintest ghost of warmth. He took out some cold slices of ham from his fridge and tore them into smaller pieces. Bear devoured them gratefully, tail lifting just a little. Footsteps thumped hurriedly outside the cabin. A small voice called out, breathless, anxious, "Bear! Bear! Where are you?" The door creaked open before Thomas could fully stand, and Lily Carter appeared in the doorway, cheeks flushed from running through the cold. Her light brown curls were half tucked beneath a knitted white hat, and her amber eyes widened with relief when she saw the German shepherd safe and content. "I'm so sorry, sir. He just ran off. He bolted right out the door," she exclaimed, hands flapping in that dramatic, heartfelt way only children manage to make endearing. Behind her, snow dusted her red coat and scarf, and her boots left small prints melting onto the wooden floor. She took a step forward, then another, until she stood just beside Bear, who had already returned to Thomas's side protectively. Thomas managed a genuine smile, thin but real. "It's all right, sweetheart. He saved my morning." His tone was soft, almost tender, surprising even himself. Lily brightened instantly. Her worries melted into a broad, delighted grin, one that brought a spark of light into the dim room. "He always knows stuff," she said proudly. "Mom says he's like a superhero. Dad says he's too smart for his own good." Bear nudged Thomas's knee again, as if to confirm the statement. Lily giggled, then her smile faltered at the edges. She shifted her weight awkwardly and looked down at her boots. "School wasn't great yesterday," she admitted in a small voice. "Nobody really talked to me. I tried, but people already had their friend groups." Thomas's brows pulled together. Her vulnerability tugged at something deep, something paternal that had long gone unused. "I'm sorry to hear that," he murmured. Lily shrugged, trying to act braver than she felt. "It's okay. I have Bear. He always stays with me. He knows when I'm sad." She looked toward the window, speaking quietly. "I guess we take care of each other." Thomas glanced at the dog, seeing in him not just loyalty but a purpose, one he now realized extended beyond Lily. Bear was a creature who sensed cracks in people and filled them with presence. A gentle knock on the open door frame startled them all. A white woman in her late 30s, tall and slender with a cream-colored coat wrapped around her, offered a polite but concerned expression. She had soft blue eyes and blonde hair tied back neatly, suggesting a personality inclined toward gentleness and order. "Lily," she said, breath forming clouds in the cold air, "you ran out so fast I thought something was wrong." Lily turned and waved. "Mom, Bear ran away again, but he's okay." Emily Carter stepped inside only far enough to avoid the wind. Her expression softened when she looked at Thomas. "I hope he didn't cause any trouble," she said, voice warm but tinged with embarrassment. "No trouble," Thomas replied. "He helped, actually." Emily smiled, a quiet, grateful smile that revealed a kindness shaped by years of caring for others. "I'm glad." She gently rested a hand on Lily's shoulder. "We should let Mr. Hale enjoy his morning now." Lily nodded, though she hesitated. Before stepping out, she gave Bear one last pat and looked up at Thomas. "We'll come visit again, if that's okay." Thomas opened his mouth to respond, surprised by how much the idea comforted him. "I'd like that," he said simply. Bear paused at the threshold, glancing back at Thomas once more. His eyes carried a message as clear as before. Stay. As the trio disappeared into the snowy street, the cabin felt quieter again, but not in the same suffocating way as earlier. Something subtle had shifted. A small thread, delicate but real, now tied Thomas to the world outside his door. Bear had interrupted more than just a morning. He had interrupted an ending. For the first time in many weeks, Thomas walked away from the pill bottle without looking back. The following days unfolded with a gentle rhythm Thomas hadn't felt in years. Winter still wrapped Maple Hollow in its pale embrace, but something warm now threaded itself into the old man's routine. Something small, steady, and unexpectedly alive. Each morning brought the faint sound of crunching snow, followed by soft knocks or, occasionally, the scrabble of eager paws. Bear and Lily appeared as though the world itself had decided Thomas was not allowed to disappear quietly. Lily came bundled in her familiar red winter coat, her cheeks always flushed pink from the cold, and her wavy, light brown hair poking out from beneath a knitted white hat. Every day she carried some new story from school, a drawing she had made, or a tiny trinket she wanted to show him, like a pebble she swore looked exactly like a potato with feelings. Her expressive amber eyes brightened the cabin just by existing in it. She talked with an honesty only children possessed, and Thomas found himself listening with a heart that slowly thawed. Bear made himself comfortable as though the cabin was merely an extension of his territory now. The 5-year-old German shepherd, all black and tan fur and noble posture, would settle near Thomas's feet, resting his head on the old man's knee with a sigh that seemed older than his age. He watched over both humans with a patient vigilance, always alert yet gentle, a quiet guardian whose presence steadied Thomas in moments he didn't even realize he was drifting. Thomas's days, once empty and echoing with memories he wanted to escape, now held unplanned but welcome surprises. Lily would comment on the oak tree outside. "It keeps dropping leaves like it's confused, like an old man trying to decide on a haircut," she said once, and Thomas laughed. An actual laugh, full and warm, so suddenly that it startled him. The sound echoed inside the cabin, brushing dust from places he thought grief had sealed shut forever. One afternoon, Lily arrived earlier than usual, carrying a thermos full of hot cocoa her mother had made. She set it carefully on Thomas's coffee table, smoothing her mittens with exaggerated seriousness. Bear circled the room once and then leaned against Thomas's leg as if claiming him. Lily swung her legs as she sat on the old wooden chair opposite Thomas. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice softer than usual, "Bear told me you're sad." She paused, eyes flicking toward the German shepherd. "Well, not in words, but I can just tell. I don't know why you're sad, but I like being your friend. I'm glad you're here." A lump formed in Thomas's throat. The room blurred slightly at the edges as his eyes stung. He cleared his throat and looked away, focusing on the dancing shadows cast by the fireplace. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered. "You and Bear, you've helped more than you know." She smiled, wide and innocent, swinging her boots against the chair. Bear pressed, his head a little harder into Thomas's leg, as if agreeing wordlessly. Later that week, Lily's visits became more predictable, each one forming small anchors in Thomas's day. She told him about school, where she still struggled to make friends. She spoke of her teacher, Mrs. Hanley, a woman in her mid-40s with curly brown hair and a strict but fair way of speaking. Lily described her as someone who looks scary but gives extra stickers if you try really hard. Thomas smiled at Lily's matter-of-fact evaluations, recognizing how she used humor to cope with feeling out of place. Bear, on the other hand, had befriended the entire street. He roamed with the confidence of a seasoned explorer, though he always returned to Thomas's cabin as if reporting back to duty. Sometimes neighbors waved at Thomas from afar, people he had never spoken to before, because Bear had introduced him by proxy. For a man who had spent a year in self-imposed isolation, these small interactions felt strangely significant. Emily Carter, Lily's mother, watched all of this with growing curiosity and cautious hope. She was a slim, white woman with gentle blue eyes and blonde hair tied neatly behind her head. Before moving to Maple Hollow, she had worked as a volunteer coordinator at a community center, where she learned to read people quickly. She sensed from the very beginning that Thomas's loneliness ran deeper than simple solitude. At first, she worried about Lily intruding too much, worried that the old man, with his quiet, almost haunted demeanor, might not welcome such youthful energy every day. But each time she saw Bear trotting happily across the snow toward Thomas's porch, Emily relaxed a little more. She noticed subtle changes, too. Thomas's posture rising slightly, the faint warmth returning to his expression. It softened something in her, allowing trust to grow. Daniel Carter, Lily's father, observed things differently. A white man in his early 40s with short brown hair and thoughtful gray eyes behind thin-framed glasses, Daniel had once served in the Army Reserve. Though he rarely spoke of it, the discipline and camaraderie had shaped his sense of duty. When he first met Thomas, even from a distance, he recognized the particular heaviness in the man's face, a heaviness carried by those who knew more loss than they ever admitted. Daniel often glanced through the window as Lily visited the cabin. The sight stirred something protective in him, but also familiarity. He decided to check in on Thomas occasionally, standing on the porch to chat about weather or the snow shoveling schedule. These conversations were brief but meaningful. Thomas appreciated them silently, unsure how to express gratitude without revealing too much of his fractured interior. As the days passed, the cabin, once consumed by silence, now held traces of life. A forgotten crayon Lily left behind on the table. A few paw prints Bear tracked in after walking, through melted snow. A warm thermos from Emily. A light knock from Daniel after work. These were small things, but they were lifelines weaving themselves into Thomas's world. One late afternoon, the sky shifting from pale gray to lavender, Lily asked a question that halted him entirely. She sat on the rug with Bear's head in her lap, absent-mindedly stroking his fur. Her voice was little more than a murmur. "Are you going to be okay, Mr. Hale?" Thomas froze. He couldn't answer. Not truthfully. But Lily lifted her head and added softly, "Bear thinks you will, and I do too." He turned away so she wouldn't see his eyes welling. Yet the warmth in his chest spread, quiet but real. He whispered, "Thank you, Lily." Because of her, because of Bear. The goodbye he had planned so carefully was no longer so close. For the first time, he wasn't counting down toward an ending. He was simply living one day at a time. And that was enough. Christmas Eve arrived with a softness that touched every rooftop in Maple Hollow. Warm lights glowing through frosted windows, laughter drifting like gentle bells, and the rich scent of cinnamon and roasted chicken curling into the cold night air. The whole town seemed wrapped in comfort, wrapped in belonging. Except for the cedar cabin at the end of Willow Bend Road. Inside, the only sound was the quiet cracking of the fireplace. Thomas Hale sat hunched on his worn sofa, the dim glow painting deep shadows across his 62-year-old face. His silver hair reflected the firelight, making him look older, almost fragile. On the small table beside him rested a framed photograph of Margaret, her soft smile frozen forever in a world he could no longer reach. Thomas ran a thumb along the edge of the frame, tracing her outline like a man memorizing his last tether to the earth. Outside, snow fell in thick, deliberate flakes. But inside him, the storm had already arrived. He whispered, barely more than a breath, "I'm coming, Margaret." His voice cracked, the words trembling like his weakened hands. A knock sounded at the door, light, tentative, and followed by a soft bark. Thomas inhaled sharply. Part of him wished they hadn't come. A bigger part wished they'd stay forever. He opened the door to find Lily Carter standing with her usual red winter coat, though tonight it looked brighter, almost festive. Her amber eyes sparkled under the porch lights, cheeks reddened by cold. In her gloved hands she held a small Christmas card, decorated with glitter and uneven stars, handmade with devotion only a child could give. At her side, Bear stood proudly, his black and tan fur dusted with snow, tail wagging in wide, hopeful swishes. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Hale," Lily chirped, bouncing slightly with excitement. Thomas tried to match her brightness, but the smile trembled on his lips. He knelt down and took the card with hands that shook more from emotion than age. "Thank you, sweetheart." Bear leaned forward, pressing his head against Thomas's chest. Without thinking, Thomas wrapped his arms around both Lily and Bear. It was a deep, heavy embrace, one filled with love, gratitude, and a quiet sorrow he prayed they would never understand. Lily giggled softly, but Bear remained still, sensing the weight in the old man's heart. "You've made this winter warmer for me," Thomas whispered, his voice thick. "Both of you." Lily beamed, unaware she had just been given a farewell. "You're coming to dinner, right? Mom made a big meal. Dad said we should invite neighbors, so you have to come, okay?" Thomas swallowed painfully. "We'll see, sweetheart. Thank you." When the two disappeared down the snow-covered path, a cold emptiness rushed into the space they had filled. Thomas stepped back inside, closing the door gently, too gently, as though trying not to disturb the good memories they had left behind. At the Carter home across the street, warmth spilled through wide windows. Emily Carter was lighting candles along the dining table, her soft blonde hair tied neatly behind her head. She wore a cozy green sweater and moved with a gentle grace, the kind developed by mothers who carried both love and perpetual worry. Daniel Carter stood near the kitchen counter, carving the roasted chicken with careful, practiced hands. His brown hair, cropped short, glinted slightly beneath the warm lights. His eyes behind thin-framed glasses were thoughtful, often scanning the room, always attuned to his family. Lily burst through the door, shaking snow from her coat. "Mom! Dad! Mr. Hale liked the card, and he gave us the warmest hug ever, like a sad Santa." Emily chuckled softly, but Daniel paused, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. He knew what a heavy hug felt like, one given by someone carrying too much inside. Before he could speak, Bear stiffened. The German shepherd's ears snapped upright and his tail fell still. His muscles tightened, body going rigid in an instant. Then, without warning, he bolted toward the front door and barked. Loud, panicked, urgent. "Bear?" Emily gasped. "What's wrong?" But the dog didn't wait. He lunged forward, pushing the door open with his weight, then sprinted into the snow, barking as if fire licked at his paws. "Bear!" Lily cried, rushing after him. Daniel dropped the carving knife, heart pounding. "Something's wrong. Move!" Emily grabbed Lily's hand and ran out with her. The wind bit their faces as they raced through the snow-filled street. Bear was already halfway to Thomas's cabin, barking wildly, almost screaming. When they reached the porch, Bear scratched and slammed his paws against the wooden door, his barks echoing through the freezing air. Daniel stepped forward, knocked hard. "Thomas! Thomas, can you hear me?" Silence. He banged again. "Thomas!" Still nothing. Emily's face drained of color. "Daniel, something's wrong. Please, get us in there, now." With one decisive breath, Daniel lowered his shoulder, bracing himself. He had done this before, years ago, in a different life, for different reasons. The muscle memory returned instantly. He rammed the door once, twice, then on the third hit, the wood splintered and swung open. The sight inside froze them all. Thomas lay slumped on the sofa, his tall, thin frame twisted unnaturally. The dim glow from the fireplace illuminated his pallid skin, the blue wool scarf of Margaret slipping from his lap. Beside him, a bottle of sleeping pills lay on its side, scattering pale capsules across the rug like fallen winter seeds. Lily gasped and clung to her mother's coat. Emily covered her mouth, tears already rising. Daniel rushed forward, pressing 2 fingers to Thomas's neck. "He's breathing," he said sharply. "Weak, but breathing." Bear stood beside the sofa, trembling violently. His deep growls weren't threats. They were pleas, warnings, grief. He nudged Thomas's shoulder repeatedly, whining, as if trying to pull him back into the world. Daniel scooped Thomas into his arms with a steadiness born from old training. "We're taking him to the hospital. Now." As they hurried into the cold Christmas Eve night, Bear stayed pressed to Daniel's side, refusing to let Thomas out of his sight. And for the first time in his life, the German Shepherd wasn't guarding a home, or a street, or a family. He was guarding a soul. The hospital lights glowed like distant winter stars, bright, sterile, and strangely serene. Thomas Hale surfaced slowly from a heavy, dreamless dark, the kind of sleep that made waking feel like clawing upward through layers of snow. His vision blurred at first, but as the whiteness sharpened, warmth brushed against his arm. A familiar weight, a steady breath, a quiet devotion. Bear. The 5-year-old German Shepherd lay curled beside the bed, his black and tan fur rising softly with each breath. One of his paws rested protectively over Thomas's wrist, and his head was nestled on the old man's forearm as though guarding him from whatever shadows lingered near. The dog's brown eyes blinked open the moment Thomas stirred. Relief softened them in a way that felt almost human. A soft gasp broke the quiet. Lily, small, wrapped in a puffy red coat 2 sizes too warm for the hospital room, launched herself forward, her wavy, light brown hair bouncing wildly as her amber eyes filled instantly with tears. "You scared me," she cried between shaky breaths. "You scared all of us. You can't leave yet, Mr. Hale. I didn't even get to show you what I got for Christmas." Thomas's voice cracked, his throat dry, the words trembling. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I wasn't thinking clearly. And if it weren't for you, and Bear, I wouldn't be here to apologize." Lily sniffled and wiped her eyes with her mittened hands. Bear knew something was wrong. He wouldn't stop barking. Dad said it was like he was yelling at us to hurry. Thomas turned his head, looking at Bear with quiet awe. "Good boy," he whispered. The dog placed his head back on the old man's chest, as if claiming responsibility for his survival. The doorway filled with Daniel Carter's silhouette. Tall, steady, a protective presence shaped by years of being both father and veteran. His navy winter coat hung open, revealing a simple flannel shirt, and his thin-framed glasses glinted in the hospital light. His expression, usually calm, held a stern tenderness as he placed a firm hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," Daniel said, voice low but warm. "You hear me? You don't get to disappear on us." Emily Carter followed him in, her blonde hair tied back neatly, her gentle blue eyes red-rimmed from crying but still shining with kindness. She carried a small thermos, cocoa by the smell, and set it on the table with delicate fingers used to caring for others. The soft, cream-colored coat she'd thrown on in a rush still held traces of snow. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with quiet emotion. "We're just glad you're safe. Lily couldn't sleep all night." Lily nodded vigorously, climbing onto the edge of the bed with the confidence only a child possessed. Bear shifted to make room for her, resting his chin on her lap. She stroked his fur absent-mindedly, grounding them both. For Thomas, the weight of their presence. These people who owed him nothing hit him harder than any blow he had ever taken in war. Gratitude rose like a tide, overwhelming and unfamiliar. His silver hair, tousled against the pillow, made him look as fragile as he felt. "I didn't think anyone would care," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Not after Margaret." Emily sat at the foot of the bed. "We care," she said softly. "You matter. You always have." A nurse entered the room then. A new face. She was in her early 30s, white, with short dark blonde hair tucked behind her ears and soft freckles across her cheeks. Her uniform was crisp, her movements efficient yet gentle. Her name tag read Nora Willis. Nora possessed the kind of calm that came from years of guiding frightened or grieving patients. Her brown eyes were warm but perceptive, scanning Thomas with a professional's instinct. "Well," Nora said with a small smile, "looks like someone has quite a loyal fan club. That's always a good sign for recovery." She checked his vitals, adjusted the IV with careful hands, and spoke to him in a soothing, even tone. "You were lucky. Very lucky. Whatever happened, you're getting a second chance. Not everyone gets that gift on Christmas." Her words hung in the air like a gentle reminder. Thomas nodded faintly. After a while, Nora stepped out, leaving the little group wrapped in a peculiar sense of peace. Lily remained perched on the edge of the bed, leaning gently against the old man. Daniel and Emily pulled chairs close, forming a small circle around him, warm, protective, unspoken. For the first time in a long time, Thomas didn't feel like a ghost drifting through his own life. He felt seen. Several days passed, marked by slow healing, regular check-ins, and Bear's unwavering presence. The hospital staff adored the dog, even though he technically wasn't supposed to be there. But no one had the heart to send him away, not when he curled himself under the bed every night like a living guardian angel, not when his ears perked at every subtle change in Thomas's breathing. Lily visited daily, bringing drawings, stories, and an ever-growing list of questions. Do veterans get special hospital food? Do old houses get cold because they miss people? Do dogs know it's Christmas? Each one tugged a smile out of Thomas, and each one slowly stitched him back together. When the day finally came for Thomas to be discharged, the world outside felt different, brighter but softer, like the first true sunrise after a long storm. Daniel helped him walk to the car, steadying him with a supporting hand. Emily had the back seat prepared with blankets. Bear climbed in first, taking his usual spot by Thomas's side, refusing to leave even for a second. Back on Willow Bend Road, the Carter home glowed with warm golden lights. Inside, a table was set with care. Leftover garlands, mismatched candles, and evergreen branches that Lily had decorated with tiny painted stars. "It's a little late," Emily admitted shyly as they ushered Thomas inside, "but we wanted you to have a Christmas dinner. A proper one." Lily skipped into the room carrying a red paper hat and plopped it onto Thomas's head. "You're my Christmas grandpa now," she declared proudly. "Everyone needs one." Daniel chuckled softly. "She's been saying that all week." Thomas felt something swell in his chest, something he once believed had died with Margaret. Hope. Warm and overwhelming. He blinked quickly, but a tear escaped anyway. Emily pretended not to see it. Lily didn't pretend at all. She hugged him fiercely. Bear settled at Thomas's feet and placed his head on the old man's knee, breathing out a long, satisfied sigh. His tail tapped gently against the floor, slow and content. And in that golden-lit room, surrounded by the laughter of a family he never expected, Thomas realized the truth. It wasn't too late. Not for love. Not for healing. Not for life. Christmas had come for him after all. Just a little late. This story reminds us that God's miracles often come quietly through people and moments we least expect a child's kindness. A loyal dog, a neighbor who cares. Even in our darkest nights, God sends signs that we are not alone and never beyond His reach. If this touched your heart, please share the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more uplifting stories. And if you believe God can use ordinary love to save lives, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and everyone watching.